dog.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Work in Progress. My name is Colleen Loretz, and today joined again by Rachel. We've got a special guest that we'll introduce in just a second, but just a quick reminder, this is Work in Progress from the Reno Collective, the show all about work, life, and everything in between. How you doing, Rachel?
I'm doing pretty good. Oh, good. The dog stopped barking. I'm doing all right.
So this is we're coming off of Rachel just got off of another hour-long live stream. So we're doing it live today, and today we have our special guest with us, Colleen Camenisch, and she is the founder of Equilibrium MBSR. Which we'll have her introduce what that is in a second. But she has been teaching mindfulness based stress reduction programs along with other meditation practices for over a decade. And that's really going to be the theme for this episode. You know, we've talked about the pandemic. We've talked about having fun and playing games at home and online. We've talked about money and the pandemic. And now I think it's pretty timely for us to just kind of sit with what we're all experiencing, that low-key stress that we've been having since the pandemic started, plus all the other environmental factors that we have, and kind of just get into it. So welcome.
Thanks. Yes, welcome, Colleen. Bring us into your field, if you will.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing would be what is Equilibrium MBSR, and how did you get involved with that?
Yeah, so Equilibrium is my company, and MBSR is actually the most widely researched secular mindfulness intervention that exists right now. So it's when you look at the really good research, everybody's, seen probably the apps and the articles in Time Magazine that come out with all this great data on how much it improves your health. And what's really interesting about that is, while there's a lot of resources that are popular right now, the evidence predominantly comes from this intervention that I teach, these mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. And I'll just say a little bit about that because I think it's an important thing to consider in the world of mindfulness today. But that intervention is 8 weeks long, and the participants are encouraged to actually practice meditation 45 minutes a day. And so I think sometimes when people think about mindfulness or meditation, they kind of think about it when it's like, oh man, I'm super stressed and I need to relax, so I should meditate. And actually, that's not at all the way meditation works. It's kind of like training, and I think that this will come up as we look at the pandemic, probably as we move through our talk together today. But it's really a training of the mind. And so, everybody knows that if you get on a treadmill once for 20 minutes, you are not healthier. That's just something you did for 20 minutes that day. And it's really the same with the mind. When we look at the structural changes of the brain that we know happen to meditators, it's based on about 20 minutes a day of practice over a period of time. And then, of course, if you look at monks, which is, where different research has been done, there's actually super fascinating things, but different than what you would see in people that are, doing a regular meditation practice on an ongoing basis. So, and then the other thing that I'll say about that intervention that I think is timely and unique is that it's an intervention surrounded with community. So I've been thinking about, especially now during the pandemic, how there are so many great mindfulness apps again, but there's really like what you're doing is you're practicing in isolation. And usually without a teacher, like even if teachers are coming on, they're not really knowing anything about you or your practice. And so the really cool part about the MBSR class that I teach is that that exists actually all over the world, is that it's really about being there with a community of people that are learning to meditate. And I think it debunks a lot of the myths. Like a lot of people will come to the class now and they're like, I just can't do this. I can't clear my mind. And it's like, well, this isn't at all about clearing your mind, right. But they didn't have enough guidance to really know that it's actually about noticing how much the mind drifts off. And again, this process of training the mind to come back when you're aware of that. So, and then I guess the other part of that question was, how did I get involved? And the easy answer is I was super stressed. And And I had developed, at one point in my life, I went to Italy and it was super awesome and I was very relaxed. And so I developed this returning to Italy problem because it solved my stress. And then when I tried to move there officially, it got really stressful, between trying to get my visa to come through and a relationship that I was in at the time and all of the other real life things that happen. And I kind of realized wherever you go, there you are. And I had a book about the course that I teach now. And I actually just read the testimonials and I was like, I think I should do this. I think I should take this course. So I moved to Massachusetts because nothing like that existed here. And I took the course and I was super skeptical. I thought this is probably going to be like a bunch of hippies sitting around and like meditating, but it was great and really life-changing for me. And so, yeah, now I've been teaching it for like 13 years and I don't know, maybe I'm one of those hippies now that, not that I have anything against hippies, just to put that disclaimer out there, but I come from a business background. And so, I was a skeptic and now I'm all in.
Well,
sorry, Colin.
Go ahead.
That was really fascinating to me when you talked about the idea of the community. And I understand that that's with, specific classes, but that just touches a soft spot that we have, with co-working with the Reno Collective. And I was talking about, just recently about using technology and building community with technology, but that idea of practicing and training with mindfulness, where I guess I would sort of think of that as a very individual activity, an isolating activity, I suppose. But that idea of doing it with a community, whether it's in person or whether it's online, that just really struck a chord. Has a lot to do with what, Colin and I have been discussing, whether it's on the show or just day to day. So that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah. And I think, if we look at Buddhist philosophy, again, I teach a secular course where we don't include any of that. But if you look at Buddhist philosophy, they talk about the 3 jewels of practice, which are this quality of being awake, the teachings that you learn, and the community. So that's actually really considered fundamentally an important part of the training process, because what happens when we practice alone, and what happens in life in general, and I think especially in an individualistic country like we're in, is that people tend to be isolated in their own problems. And as soon as you open up the practice, like one of the questions I ask when I first start teaching is, what brought you here? And it's like, all of a sudden, there's a room of 30 other people that are all stressed and have significant things going on in their life. And it's like, oh, I'm not alone anymore. And here are other people that, one of the other cool things about meditation, especially the intervention I teach, it's not for the faint of heart. So again, it's an 8-week program where you're practicing quite a bit, is that people come because they're ready to change. And so there's something about wanting to know the truth, even if it's hard, that is really powerful about meditation. And being with a community of people that are all willing to do that work is also really, really powerful and inspiring and transformational.
Yeah, the thing that I think about there is like community is almost built through shared experience, right? It doesn't matter what technology we use to try to bring everybody together. If everybody has this shared experience, there's some camaraderie there. We've all been through it together. I think that's why I really like running races like the ones where you have like 8 people in a van or something like that, right? Because no matter how good or bad it is, it's a shared experience that we're all sharing, and you're just closer to those people. And I know, especially you coming from business background, you work with a lot of businesses in the community with your program, and kind of how does that work in terms of why do companies come to you wanting to teach this to their employees?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's a little complicated to answer. I think one, mindfulness has become super popular, and again, I think there's such great validated research, and then people or organizations like Google adopted it, so it became kind of like, well, this is pretty cool, and people like it. But I think usually when people hire me, they have this sense of like, people are really stressed, and we want to support them in some way. And so a lot of times that can be my biggest challenge going into a company, is to sort of manage those expectations and to remind them that we can bring in a mindfulness intervention, but it's an awareness practice. It's not a stress reduction practice, although stress reduction is a side effect from the practice.
Right.
So usually, there's sort of a conversation about that. But it's, especially as the pandemic has started, my business clients have increased significantly. And I think the other thing that people are really looking at now is just what we're talking about, community. Like, people can't be in the same room together anymore. We want to find a way to bring them together. And what's cool for me, I've been teaching online before the pandemic. So I had like some experience, but the classes that I'm teaching now don't feel very much different. I would say it's 95% the same as being in a room together. So it's been really cool to see what's possible, especially with companies. Like I'll be working with a company in the new year that's like spread out across the US. And yet there's a way for us all to come together and again, to talk about this common purpose and even again to share like what are our struggles and how can we transform rather than just be caught in that process.
That's awesome.
That fills me with some hope. The risk of sounding cheesy, that fills me with some hope for our future.
I think to get a little tactical, what sort of things, I know you have a couple notes around things that you wanted to talk about, but I guess especially from the awareness perspective, I think a lot of people do like download something like Calm and they just kind of mindlessly do it, right? Without really being aware. It's very meta of why or they're doing what they're doing, or in some cases, like you said, judging the thoughts that are coming to mind, or the fact that they're having thoughts, because I think a lot of pop culture likes to say like meditation is like you're not thinking of anything, you have an empty mind, and then that's like impossible. So what sorts of things would you recommend if someone is interested in just being more aware of their present circumstances?
Recommend as far as like classes or just like general thought processes?
Yeah, kind of like if we were to be in a room together, how would you, not to necessarily run through a practice right now, but what are things that either are methods or learnings that MBSR can bring to bringing that awareness on your day? Like, like you said, your life was stressful and it brought you to this program. What were those things that you've kind of found initially?
Yeah, so like one of the things that everything about mindfulness seems really, really simple, like when I say it.
Yeah.
But in practice isn't necessarily that easy. So one of the most powerful things that mindfulness practice can help us with is developing a stronger quality of awareness. And again, that sounds simple, but to have awareness in the present moment is really integral to the training path of meditation and mindfulness. And the reason for that is because if you aren't aware of something, you can't change it, right? As soon as there's awareness, all of a sudden there's more possibilities. And so for a lot of us, especially when we think about the way that the mind works, or the way that the body is, we have habits and patterns, and a lot of times we're operating on autopilot. And it's not necessarily anybody's fault. So I'm not saying like, oh, people are just on autopilot. It has a lot to do with our hardwiring. I mean, after teaching this many years, what's been really impactful to me is recognizing like we are hardwired to survive. And so we have all these fight, flight, freeze mechanisms. That's why stress has an impact on us. And so really mindfulness training or meditation, it actually helps to rewire some of the so I think about it like reverse engineering the human experience. Or taking stuff that's really good if we're really in a survival situation, and then bringing enough awareness basically with our prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of self-regulation, to choose whether or not we need to pay attention to that. And so mindfulness is really powerful that way, that we can start to have more options, more choices, more space around things that would sort of habitually happen in our life. And that's actually where I see most of the change happening in students that take up a practice. It's cool as a teacher because I always tell people like, you don't have to change anything coming in here, just meditate. And things change on their own once people become aware of them. It's like as soon as you can see something, you can uproot it. But if you don't see it, you just keep passing by it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of went through my own. I had a situation where I got really sick a few years ago, and very similar. It was definitely stress based. It made me really sit down and evaluate everything that I was doing. Right, I had to think about like, am I doing too many projects? And of course, people who know me, then the answer is probably yes. Am I spreading myself too thin? Where am I spending my attention? And I don't think I ever thought of it as necessarily. I don't think I approached it from like a meditative and mindfulness perspective, but it was the kind of what gets measured gets managed situation, or more of the business side of it. It's like I needed to start writing everything down, realizing that my day was too full every day. So of course you don't have anything left at the end of every day, and you start the next day, with an empty tank. And it really did, make me start to like write everything down, start to pay attention to everything, and then start to eliminate what wasn't essential, focus on the essential things or the things that made me feel better, right? Working out or going on a run, instead of like, let's go find out all the new COVID numbers for today in every state and things like that. That's like, you're going to go down a bad spiral with that. And I think that might be the challenge right now, right? We have so many inputs, especially right now where we're getting election news, we're getting COVID news, we have all of our work and everything. So I think you were mentioning like kind of choosing where we place our attention, and there's so many things that we could pay attention to right now, which can be overwhelming. I think what time are we at? Rachel, go ahead.
I was going to say, I completely agree with that. It's interesting. You get a lot of those emails recently I've been getting that say, the three habits of successful business managers, or 7 habits of incredible creative designers, those types of things. What would you say that the characteristics of people who are taking that time to be mindful, and not a monk, but the sort of average person, what sorts of things before, during, after, taking a course could be a part of it, but what sort of characteristics do you see in people that have started to capture that and work with that mindfulness in the techniques?
So one thing that's coming to mind is just what Colin described. A lot of people get to a place where it's like, I have to change maybe before they get started. So there's already some motivation. Like, I want to shift, what I've been doing isn't working. So that's a useful starting point, right? And then as people take a course or develop a practice, discipline. It's the same as getting up and going to the gym. And I think that's the part where it can be really challenging. But what's cool, and I've been really thinking about this a lot, even as like with a really developed practice, mindfulness is almost like a snowball that once you start rolling it down the hill, it grows, it has its own kind of momentum. So after people start practicing and they can feel the benefits of the practice. I mean, that happens, or the awarenesses, or one of my favorite parts of teaching is people really start to connect with the preciousness of their life in a way that you can miss when you're on autopilot. And so that sort of momentum carries people a long way. And then again, I think I've tried to offer through my organization community, like I'm offering a 1-year program now, and that was wildly popular last year. And these free community sitting groups. So again, this community and like-minded, or people that are sort of supporting each other in practice. But it also takes, a certain act of, and I think this is like the biggest challenge for everybody is, and I'm thinking about this particularly in the pandemic, and there's just one thing I want to make sure that I name while we're talking today, but the act of taking care of yourself. Like we have so many demands, like people put so many hours into work or relationships or family or all of those things. And this is just 20 minutes for you. And that's still so hard for people to get to. And so just thinking of that as like you including yourself in the circle of things that you're putting attention to and caring about, because you really can't give in that much if you don't have some for yourself. And that's hard. That's a big ask, especially in a pandemic. So I just want to name that might be like aspirational. And one quote that I wanted to say, and then I'll just say a little bit around it, is from a Greek philosopher. He said, we don't rise to our expectations, we fall to the level of our training, and This is really what we're training the mind in mindfulness, to see things clearly, to know the truth, even if it's hard, to learn to be with discomfort, all of these different things, so it can sort of hold us. But one of the things I've noticed teaching during the pandemic that's been, have this lens of seeing that the conditions of the world have wildly changed. The conditions that we all operated in 8 months ago are not what is happening now, but people are still having the same expectations of themselves. And that is creating a lot of suffering. So I just want to name that, because that's another thing that mindfulness can help us do, is like, we want to see the truth of how things are, even if it's hard. And then, so there's like these two wings of mindfulness. One is wisdom, like I'm going to see that things have changed. And then compassion, like, this is really hard, and I probably should not expect the same from myself as I did before, even though work might have even more expectations than, were there before, knowing that we're doing our best, and that the circumstances really have changed. And honestly, in my mind, I don't know, like, we don't know if they'll ever go back to the way that they were. Like that, I've been thinking we were in these unique conditions for a long period of time, so it felt solid. But another really cool part of mindfulness is we start to sort of deconstruct the solid nature of things and recognize that the world is always in process, that us as a person and who we are, it's in process. And if we see it as something more fluid, then we don't get so much suffering when it changes.
That's interesting, because oftentimes, like, this is, I guess, the little bit of the less of the secular part of it, but the suffering comes from that difference between expectation and reality, right? And that we cling to what we want to happen or what used to be. And I know a lot of people who, like, their work is fine, they get to work online, but they just feel they feel stressed still. I think they may not feel like they've been directly impacted, but there is this sense of collective trauma that we all have, that we're all carrying. Nothing is the same. And so just because nothing's changed at home doesn't mean that nothing has changed in your life. And so I think being kind to yourself, being gentle, having that with people, especially if you're isolated with people in a small space at home, that's not something that we probably have been used to. And so I think I would hope that someone can find that 20 minutes, even especially if you're like isolated small spaces with people that you normally don't spend that much time with in a given day. But I think in your practice too, like, I think some people may perceive meditation as like sitting on a pillow and, doing nothing. Like, what does meditation, or what can meditation look like for people as a practice?
Yeah. So, mostly meditation is bringing our attention to one thing, just one thing. So basically monotasking. And that's really useful because we're actually hardwired to do that. So once we get involved in multitasking and our attention's being pulled, that's where struggle gets created in our mind. So you could just pay attention to the breath, just the fact that you're breathing even 20 minutes might be a big ask right now, because I'm just aware of the collective trauma, like you named, it might be a lot to sit with everything that's there. But even 5 or 10 minutes of like sitting outside as we're in fall with your feet on the ground, hands resting somewhere, you're aware of those points of contact, and you're just aware of the sensations of the temperature of the air, listening to the leaves fall. It's something as simple as that, just really bringing in your focus of attention to one experience, watching the sunset and really being with it, staying with it the whole time. And there's lots of mindfulness you can do that's not formal, like listening to somebody and really paying attention to them. Walking, a lot of people have taken up walking at least once a day, really walking and just focusing on how does it feel as the feet hit the ground. And again, what's the temperature of the air, hearing the leaves, noticing the colors. So really being just more attentive to what's happening in the present moment.
Yeah, I like that. So, especially if you can't find a quiet space for yourself, like going on a walk figure out a way to make this work for you, and really to just become aware. I think, like you said, awareness is a big key of all this. And I really love that quote that you mentioned. We have a version of it that we use from James Clear's Atomic Habits, which is very similar. I mean, he basically copied it, but it's we do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. And so it's almost like, if you can cultivate this practice, whether it's in the morning or at night, whatever that is, you make a habit of it. And just like working out, like you said, like maybe you can't lift that 20-minute dumbbell, right? You can lift a 5-minute dumbbell, which might be 5 minutes of meditation, and then 10, and then ramping up to those, as much as 45 minutes a day, like you said, you do in your classes. So, and I would say here, just like being gentle with others, like be gentle with yourself. Like you can start over again tomorrow. If you missed it today, like don't try to like make up for it. It's the same in the gym. Like you can't just like go run double the amount and hope that you're like catching up. But be gentle with yourself, because there is a lot going on right now. But if you're feeling a little untethered, a little stressed out, this it's a really good practice. And you've led some for us in the space here, and those have always been very, very nice little break during the day to just kind of recenter and think about that. How about you, Rachel? Do you currently do any meditation practice or?
Well, it's, I mean, we're doing this show in the middle of COVID, right? And COVID seems to be touching us all. And today, yes, I had to take a breath, and I was very glad because I had an email from Colleen came through today while I was in the midst of an issue where COVID came very close to our family. And so I have 2 young kids and a husband, and there was a panic within me as far as, okay, where have I been? Who have I talked to? Who do I tell if this is something that we have? What is the that sort of personal contact tracing? And I started to go down this massive rabbit hole, which I really had no information for, and nothing that I could do at that moment. I didn't have the facts. I didn't know if there was a positive or a negative result. And there was a time where I would know that, and I just needed to stop and breathe for that moment. And Colleen's email popped through right around then, and it gave me the chance, thank you very much, Colleen, to step back and think about that and reduce the adrenaline rushing through my veins and breathe. And I could hear my kids, they were playing together. I could hear the dog breathing on the floor. And those little bits in that one moment helped so much. And I think that that's something a lot of us I hope that a lot of us, have something that does trigger the memory to do that, to stop and slow down and breathe and give yourself a little bit of, comfort and grace and the good things that can happen during all this chaos.
Yeah, and I think what you're pointing to there is really important. This idea of being in the present moment. So I think so one thing about mindfulness is we start to recognize that the nature of all things is impermanent and changing. It's always been like that. Right now, we feel that in a different way because it's impacting so many of the different structures of our lives. And there's things that we can take control of in the present moment. And there's a lot of things we can anticipate and worry about and think about. And so I would just encourage people to think about when the mind starts going down that road of like, I don't know, somebody was talking about the elections, and it's like, so you can vote, and then who knows? It's like you could anticipate, you could predict, and people are doing that, and like news stations. And at a certain level, it's like, who knows? Like, really, we don't know. And it's the same with the vaccine and what's going to happen with COVID. And so I would really encourage people to do that too, because and we have all these devices around us that are designed to capture our attention. And so we can choose where to place our attention. And if we're placing it in the present moment, that's the only moment we actually have any impact over. And so it's just a good reminder when the mind starts to go down these pathways, it's like, okay, come back to my breath, because that's what's happening right now. The body's always in the present moment. The mind might go off somewhere else, but your body is here breathing this breath. And so, yeah, I think that's another important reminder that there's so many places we could get pulled And we only have a finite amount of energy. So I really think about right effort when it comes to energy. Like, I want to put my energy where it counts. And so, and there might be places where I take a stance that will impact the future, but I want to be clear about those. And if my attention is in too many places, I can't have that clarity. So just this, coming back, trying to get clear, and then taking the actions we can. And at some level, it's like the rest will play out the way it plays out.
Yeah, and in your situation, Rachel, I think this was something that we worked on in one of the sessions of the collective, but it ends up becoming giving you a choice in how you respond instead of just having trigger and reaction, right? Where you're just fight, flight, freeze, or taking a breath, taking in and choosing how you respond to that situation. And because sometimes you can't, it's an unknowable future, or you have to wait for some more information instead of going down that rabbit hole that is very easy to go down.
Yeah. Yes. It's a very large rabbit hole.
The whole world under there.
So we have a couple minutes to wrap up. So is there anything that you want to leave everybody with? And we'll also have you plug where people can find you and your classes as well. But is there anything that you kind of want to try to wrap up this very simple but very complex topic of MBSR for people who are just finding it for the first time, finding you for the first time? And we'll definitely link to your website, Equilibrium, MBSR, and everything in the show notes so people can find you.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, so I guess a couple of things. What you were just saying about, react versus respond. So that and again, that takes a certain amount of awareness to know that it's happening. If we have the choice to respond, there's actually a choice. So we don't get to choose everything that's happening in the world, but so there's a lot of freedom in that. Like, what we do have the freedom to do is choose how we want to relate to experience. And so I would really encourage people to kind of notice that, like, how am I relating to this? And then also, like, one thing that's really served me well in other times, not just this, that are really challenging, is in the ways that you can, simplifying. I think, again, for many of us, maybe we're living these very complex lives. And so if there are ways that you can minimize the complexities, there's a lot of complexities in going to a grocery store these days. It's like, so if there's ways that we can, again, take care of ourselves, have compassion for ourselves, minimize any of the complexities that maybe we have control over, I would just really encourage simplifying right now. And I think, in many cases people have, but yeah, so I guess that's what I'll leave everyone with today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Colleen. And again, we'll put a link to Equilibrium MBSR in the notes, but that is equilibrium-mbsr.com. And we'll send people your way. But hope everyone enjoyed the show. And anything you want to end with, Rachel?
No, except I just want to say thank you, Colleen. It's been a very stressful day, and it's been a hectic day. And speaking with you has given, there's a lot more positivity, I feel, right now, and also a little calmer. I think that a lot of that has to do with your teacher training as well, being a professional instructor. But yeah, I thank you for joining us. I think this will be something that we'll be sharing with a lot of people.
Thanks for having me. It was really special to get to be here with both of you and to see both of you
Absolutely.
today.
It's good to see you after so many months.
I know.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We will be tuning again next Wednesday at 5 p.m. So be sure to check us back here on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. And we will catch you all next week. Thank you.
Thank you.